Welcome back to Sports Around the 313 with Triple G. And tonight we're going to do a very special tribute episode dedicated solely to Mike Ilitch. As you all know, unless you've been living on the planet of Mars, Mike Ilitch passed away this past week at the age of 87. You know, Mike Ilitch was the Little Caesars pizza guy. He started that pizza business many years ago with one store, and he built this empire with pizza stores around the world and the Fox Theater, and you know, eventually he got into buying Detroit Red Wings back in 1982, and then in 1992 he bought the Detroit Tigers. So it's quite an empire, and this is a gentleman that I really want to talk about a little bit tonight, and I want to relate to you some personal stories that I actually had with Mr. Ilitch. I'm going to start off by, first of all, giving my condolences to the Ilitch family, to his wife Marion, and to all their children, and to the city of Detroit, because the city of Detroit just lost a super person. I'm going to go back to 1982, if I could. 1982, Mike Ilitch had his Little Caesars Pizza empire. Their corporate offices were in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And there was a Denny's restaurant that was about maybe a quarter of a mile away from where his corporate headquarters were. And this particular Denny's restaurant, it was 1982, he had just bought the Detroit Red Wings. And I used to take my son, Adam. At the time, Adam was 4 years old, and I was kind of a youngster myself many years ago. And my son and I, we'd go to Denny's. I'd take him out. We'd get maybe a Grand Slam breakfast or whatever. We'd always sit up at the counter. That's when Denny's did have counters. And we'd sit up at the counter, and we'd be talking and eating and enjoying our meal. Well, one day in 1982, a gentleman walked in. He sat down 2 stools from me and my son Adam. And I looked over at him, and I thought, geez, that's Mike Ilitch, who owns Little Caesars and just bought the Detroit Red Wings. I thought, wow, is that cool? So I said, Mr. Ilitch, and he said, well, hi, how are you? And he slid over one stool to sit next to me. Now, here's a guy that's got a ton of money. I mean, a ton of money. And he sat down right next to me. And I introduced myself. He introduced himself. And I said, well, Mr. Ilitch, he said, listen, call me Mike. I said, okay, Mike. I kind of felt a little weird, but he said, call me Mike. I said, what do you think is going to happen with the Red Wings now that you bought them? I said, they've been losers for so many years. And he said, Greg, he says, I'll tell you what. He says, I hope that I can turn the Red Wings around for the sake of the fans, because fans like you and all the other people have been suffering for years without a winner with the Detroit Red Wing hockey team. He says, I want that team to be a winner. I'm going to work very hard to get that team up there and start winning again. And I said, you know what, Mike, I said to him, I said, that's all you can do. That's all we can ask of you, is to be able to do that for the fans. And so we chit-chatted about a few things here or there, and then he got a meal. He actually took something, I guess he took a carry-out, and he went back to his office, and he said goodbye, and I had introduced my son. He said, goodbye, Adam, goodbye, Greg. And again, my son and I were at the Denny's, and in walked Mr. Ilitch. He saw us sitting there, and he came right up, and he says, sometimes I'm not good with names, but he says, Greg? I said, yeah. And then this is your little son? I said, Adam. Adam, that's right. He says, I remember meeting you guys here and talking to you about the Red Wings. He says, I don't know if you've been watching the sports, but he says, I'm starting to make some changes for the good. And he says, I hope you guys are going to be pleased as fans, and hopefully things are going to go well. So, you know, that was my personal story with him. Here's a guy that was already a multimillionaire, owned Little Caesars, just bought the Detroit Red Wings, and here he is, just a common type guy. He was sitting there chewing the fat and bullshitting with me and my son like we were best friends. And you know, how many guys that have that kind of money and stature are going to take the time to sit down with the common Joe and just chew the fat about this, that, and the other thing? I have a lot of respect for him. I always liked him after that, and that was the last time I actually saw him in person. That was many years ago, but I always followed him through the news, through the sports, and then in '92 he bought the Tigers. And I can imagine that if he would have run into me or another fan at that same Denny's time, he probably would have said, you know what? I'm doing this for the fans. I want to bring a winner to the Tigers because at the time they were not doing well as well. So there we go. So listen, again, just a personal story. I wanted to give this episode just to Mike Ilitch. He's done so much for the city of Detroit, so much for the fans, so much to me and to my son Adam. And thank him again personally. And again, condolences to his family as well. And I hope that his family continues to carry on the tradition that Mike did for many, many years. And Mike, thank you so much from me to you and from my family to your family. So there it is. Now get the hell out of here. You gotta lose your mind with Detroit, Rock City.